Good morning to all you AP government people. We're going to try to get this as short and sweet as humanly possible, but we're talking about a number of things that we would identify as part of the American political culture. And yesterday we mentioned things, first of all, what political culture is. It's the common set of beliefs that Americans can agree upon about what we think about government in terms of some broader values. And so we mentioned things like natural rights, okay, equality, and we mean equality of opportunity, political equality. Uh, we mentioned liberty, maximizing freedom. We mentioned individualism and popular sovereignty. And we left off in most classes about the rule of law. And as you can see here with this particular picture, you've got a gentleman holding a sign that says, "No one's above the law." The rule of law itself refers to the fact that everyone has to abide by the same set of principles and laws. No one gets to be judged by a different set of standards. And we mentioned yesterday in some classes that people can feel very frustrated about this at times because we feel like sometimes people with means, resources, money can get away with things that other people could not. And so you have to remember too that even though we agree on these broad set of values, sometimes we have great values, but we don't always live up to them. And the idea is that we work more closely to getting to this point where everybody is held accountable. Okay, so the next thing we want to mention today in terms of part of that broad set of values is civic duty. Okay, and a lot of people know an example of civic duty, but they don't really know what it is. And in some instances, people automatically point to jury duty. They're like, oh, if I get called to jury duty, that's part of my civic duty. Okay, but your civic duty in general is referring to the fact that you feel an obligation to give back to your community, to volunteer, to get involved, help somehow, to be selfless. Here's your vocabulary word for the day, to be altruistic, okay? To do something for the community around you. It can be for your country, your state, or just in your local community. I'm always impressed with people I see in the area, whether it's Huntington, Barbersville, Milton, who just go around and pick up trash. They don't do it because they're going to get anything out of it. They just do it because it needs to be done and it's helping make the community look better, right? We believe in a sense of civic duty. Think of this for a second, too. What does the school make you do before you graduate? You're supposed to do 10 volunteer hours of work, okay? Now, let's move along to the sense of civic duty from that to optimism. And this was kind of referenced in the article that we read the other day, The American Myth. The sense of optimism is that Americans eternally are optimistic. Things are always going to get better. Prosperity's right around the corner, and somehow things are going to improve in society. And we touched on that a little bit by simply saying that we believe that things are going to get better because they always have in America. For whatever reason, for sheer luck, divine intervention, hard work, whatever you want to call it, things generally improve in the United States. And we've survived a lot. Remember, a revolution, a civil war, the issue of slavery, economic depressions, natural disasters, foreign conflicts, two world wars, the civil rights movement, the entire 1960s, the Cold War, communism, fascism, terrorism, and we're still here. Okay? That's why we're optimistic. Now, let's move on to our next political value, what we call political efficacy. That's another fun vocabulary term. Political efficacy is the belief that one person can make a difference. All right, one vote matters, and typically speaking, America has a history of a decent level of political efficacy. People believe that their participation in the process, whether it's through voting, through protesting, through contacting government officials, they believe it matters. And it does matter. One person literally can make a difference within an election. And if you don't think that's the case, and it goes beyond elections, but an example, the state of Florida in the 2000 presidential election, when they finished counting the votes, and Florida we mentioned because the Electoral College was even, and it came down to whoever won Florida would win the election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. And the state of Florida was decided by 150 votes. Millions of people voting, and literally 150 votes decided, George Bush came out ahead by 150 votes, and that decided the election for him. Okay, one person makes a difference. When one person gets involved and does something, oftentimes that inspires others. So Americans typically have had a high level of political efficacy. Now that's gone down in recent years. People have become more cynical. And think about this for a second. Do you know why people have become more cynical about government and participating in the system and thinking that maybe they don't matter as much as they once thought they did? Think of all the government scandals that we witnessed and endured, or how people with money and resources have been able to get their way when the great masses of people want something else. All right, I'll give you an example. In 2012, after the Newtown, Connecticut shootings at an elementary school, 90% of Americans believed that there should be universal background checks on the purchase of a firearm in the country. Okay, and if you don't know, there are some loopholes that allow you to get a gun without a background check, but that's another story. So 90% of people favored this measure. Believe it or not, Joe Manchin from West Virginia was one of the senators trying to make that happen. But a small group of individuals from the National Rifle Association utilized their resources and their influence in Congress to prevent that law from ever being enacted. All right. And so Americans, a lot of average Americans get frustrated when most people, 90% of the people can agree that this is a good gun regulation. And they're like, hey, you know what? Sometimes the will of the people gets overridden by the commitment of a small group. Okay. Let's move on and let's talk about a concept known as the American dream. That is part of our political culture. The American dream is the idea that in America, if you work hard, you're going to succeed, that you will rise or fall based on your own skills and your own merit. Okay. But hard work will breed success and you will be able to have a nice lifestyle here. Maybe you won't be a millionaire, but you will be able to live comfortably in your life. And the American dream is something that's really born out of the post World War II era. Um, but the American dream is somehow connected to the idea that's part of our culture too of capitalism. The idea, and if you don't know, capitalism is an economic system where private business and free markets are permitted and encouraged. Okay. And so those go together, that we have free markets where buyers and sellers make choices, and ultimately, those choices lead to a better way of life. And the American dream, being able to do that, you can start your business without much interference from the government. You can run your business as you see fit. And the only thing that determines success or failure of you and your business or your job or your work is what you do. Okay. And the American dream has changed over the years. I'll show you a little graphic here about the American dream in just a second. I don't know why I put that graphic on there, but the American dream has changed a little bit over time. And for the people born, and you can see this goes by generation. You see that people who were born 1945 or before, there's not many of them left. They had this image that you make yourself, essentially. And the expression, maybe it's an old one, that you pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That's something that people don't say much anymore, that the ability to, if things aren't going well for you, you can fix it. It's up to you. Okay. And you can see with each generation, the image of what the American dream is like changes a little bit. But the whole goal in every generation, everything is really leading towards this concept of having a comfortable lifestyle and that hard work will lead you to success. Okay. You can check out the rest of the graphic on your own, but basically it's talking about people like you all, the generation Gen Z people. You people are in, you know what? I'm not going to make generalizations about your generation, so I'll just leave that graphic for you to interpret. Okay, moving right along. Let's talk about, we got all these values that we have here. Where do they come from? Okay, why do Americans value these things generation after generation? Okay, what are the sources of our political socialization? All right, and let me define that for you real quick too. Political socialization is it's the process of passing down values from one generation to the next. Okay, So, for example, the rule of law. How do you learn that everybody should be held accountable to the same set of standards? Who's responsible for instilling ideas in you like liberty or freedom? All right. Who does that? And the answer is it's multiple things, but the biggest influence is your family. Okay. Family matters whether you want it to or not. And look, here's a little bit of free life advice for you. You're going to turn into your parents someday, and by the time you realize it, it's too late. All right. And that's not to say you're going to be exactly like them, but many of the things that your parents have instilled in you from the time you were born until now, those are very deep seated, and they teach you many of these American values. Okay. Think about this, the concept we just mentioned, the American dream. How many of your parents have instilled in you the concept that hard work will lead you to success? In school, if you study hard, you're going to make good grades. That's one of the things they instill in you, or to an extent, the rule of law. If you have siblings, your parents, at least in theory, will tell you that they treat you the same. Now, they may not treat you the same, and I know you're probably thinking, you're like, they treat my siblings differently. But in theory, they're like, hey, what we do for one child, we want to do for all of our children. That's the concept of the rule of law. All right. Or there are other concepts that they try to instill in you as well, like natural rights, that human beings, there's certain things you don't do to them just because they're human beings. Everybody deserves like this measure of respect. And we're not talking about just your parents either, but siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, the people who are closest to you. Those individuals will impact your values, and we do this in a very interesting and constructed way. Your parents try to teach you the things that they think are important, and they were taught many things because their parents thought they were important, right? And some of these things endure over time. All right. So family's one way that you get your values from one generation to the next. All right. Uh, and so let's talk about the next thing that's important in socializing people that helps pass on these values, and that's education systems. Oh, yeah, I got a picture of the castle up here. Okay. Now, with that in mind, schools actually do a very good job of this. Like we were talking about the rule of law, or even the concept of natural rights, that ultimately everybody here matters, and we don't let people get bullied. We do something about it if that happens. Ultimately, you have to do a civic duty. You have to volunteer for so many hours. We are trying to instill in you certain particular values. And educational institutions do that. Sometimes people's families don't have the values, they don't give them what they need. And school systems have become fundamentally important in doing that, in teaching you certain basic political values, things that we think are very American. Okay. And so we do think, we talk about the American dream in here. We try to emphasize that. The notion that, working hard or studying or doing what you need to do is going to help. It's going to make your life better. All right. And part of the reason we do that is we know it's true. We know that, in our instances, maybe you won't be the most successful person, but you will become more successful if you actually work hard at something. All right. Let's talk about religious institutions as well. Whether it be a church, mosque, synagogue, our three major religions, those things help pass on these values. Whether, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you think of certain things, and all three religions have a set of rules and principles that people are to abide by. Okay, like Christians and Jews work with the Ten Commandments. All right, those in particular are important to them. Muslims also have certain rules and standards that are set down by the Quran, things that people are supposed to do. All right. And in particular, Americans largely look at natural rights, and people sometimes are uncomfortable with this, but Christianity helped define our concept of natural rights, that human beings matter just because they're human beings. Because according to Christianity, uh, human beings are made in the image of God. And if a person is made in the image of God, well, maybe that life has more meaning than what we thought. Ancient cultures and civilizations had no problem executing people, killing individuals they capture in conflict, doing awful things to people. And Christianity helps change that. Now, obviously, America is not nearly as religious as it used to be, but there is a fundamental change in place now. We still value human life, even though ultimately most people would not, well, I wouldn't say most people, but a significant number of people in America don't identify as Christian. Okay? Churches and mosques and synagogues also emphasize charity, giving your money away, volunteering in your community, doing things for others that you would do for yourself. Okay. And last but certainly not least, the mass media. Okay. And when we say mass media, we're talking about the forms of entertainment and communication in our culture. This isn't just like the news. We're talking about TV shows in general. Okay. Or the books that you read. These things pass on our culture in a lot of different capacities, including politics. All right. And think of children's shows. In a lot of children's shows, we're teaching you about things like, for example, Sesame Street. Classic example of a show that teaches you about values. And they don't focus on political values, but things like fair play, treating people kindly, all right, being nice to everyone you meet. Back in the 1960s, Mr. Rogers, if you've ever watched Mr. Rogers growing up, Mr. Rogers did a really big thing. He had a scene where a regular on his show was a neighborhood police officer, and the neighborhood police officer was black. And they set up a kids' pool, a kiddie pool that Mr. Rogers put his feet in just to cool off and relax in. And he invited the black police officer to come and put his feet in the pool as well. And it had a dramatic impact on people because at the time that was a big deal for a black man and a white man to be seen together like that and basically having their feet in the same pool at the same time. It was showing or demonstrating a measure of equality. Okay. And to us, that seems so silly and trivial now, but it was a big deal for the time. When I was growing up, we would watch the cartoon G.I. Joe, and I know that most of you people probably have not seen G.I. Joe, but at the end of every single episode, uh, they would have a little life lesson where a kid would be in trouble, and he would always, a G.I. Joe member would come and save him from a really dangerous situation, and they would emphasize, the kid would always say something to the effect of, "Wow, I didn't know that." And the G.I. Joe figure, the character would always say, knowing is half the battle. And if you ask anybody my age, like if you say knowing is half the battle, they'll immediately know where you got that from. Okay? Think about the TV shows in your generation. What political values do they pass on? And what do the books that you read, the popular books at the time, and thinking about the popular literature of the last 20 years, in particular, like let's say Harry Potter, do they help pass on some of the values that Americans really appreciate? And it doesn't even matter that it was J.K. Rowling who wrote it, a British lady. British values and culture are really not that much different when it comes to politics than our own. Okay, so political socialization happens through a couple different mechanisms: family, schools, religious institutions, and the mass media we consume. The music that you listen to will sometimes do that as well. I know that you guys love your Cardi B and Beyonce and whoever else is popular on mainstream music, but believe it or not, some people actually write music that's political in nature. If you go back to the 1980s, U2, the band U2, was extremely political in a number of their songs. Okay. Now, one other thing we want to mention about our political culture is that political culture changes over time. Okay. Some of the things that we value now, we didn't always value. For example, equality of opportunity. Women did not always have access to the right to vote. And that's a big deal. Okay? Because the fact that now we accept that women having the right to vote is not a problem, but 150 years ago, nobody really thought that women should vote. Right? Even women, to a large degree, didn't see that as a thing because they just generally didn't have an interest in politics. But we changed. Okay? Here's an example of how something that we value now might not change all the time. Your generation, and I know I said I was going to try not to make overarching generalizations, but your generation is not always a fan of the American dream, the concept that if you work hard, you're always going to get ahead, or that that you'll necessarily have a comfortable lifestyle, or that that's the only thing in life. That concept of the American dream frustrates a lot of people, and they don't feel like it's accurate. In some instances, some of you might have seen your parents work really hard and barely be able to make ends meet, and not necessarily have the money and resources that they need or would like to have. Okay, so things might change over the next 30 to 40 years, and it's hard to predict about what's going to be okay in terms of what we believe and what we don't think will be okay. All right, so our next our next topic here, we're moving from our broad beliefs, okay, our broad beliefs to more specific beliefs, okay? So political culture focuses on the broad beliefs that we can all share, that most Americans would agree on. It's like our statement that most people in our class would agree that ice cream is good, all right? But saying ice cream is good is not enough. What if we ask something more specific about what the best flavor of ice cream is? And if chocolate is not included in your best flavor of ice cream, then I don't want to know you anymore. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay? So, with that in mind, let's get more specific. Okay? Now we want to start talking about political ideology. All right? And political ideology is a specific set of beliefs that a person has about government and politics. It's a more specific set of beliefs that a person has about government and politics. All right. And in America, there are two major ideologies, and we'll explain like the differences between them and a few others. But we have two specific belief systems that dominate the scene: liberalism and conservatism. Okay. And in our second little video, we're going to get to that. But this is where we're going to stop with this video for the moment. And I am super glad that you guys have paid attention for this long, and I will see you tomorrow.